and a couple of folks here to speak with us. And we got started a little bit late, so if you need to run a little bit late, that's fine. We don't have anything scheduled in committee after lunch, so we've got all day pretty much until until 3. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. For the record, I'm John Sales. I'm the CEO at the Vermont Food Bank. And with me?
I'm Carrie Saylor. I'm the Government and Public Affairs Officer at the Vermont Food Bank. You can't see me. Does that matter?
No, that's okay.
Put my face in.
Would you repeat your name?
Say it again.
Your name again?
My name is Carrie Saylor.
Thank you.
Great. You want me to just dive in?
Yeah, well, you know what? Let me give a little context because you're the first witness that we've had in the chair, and we're Representative Tumpman was asking me earlier, what's the day going to look like? What's the week going to look like? What's the rest of the session going to look like? And we'll be having a number of folks coming in and visiting with us over the next couple of weeks from both within the Vermont state government and other organizations that we might be dealing with statute-wise, bill-wise as session. So the committee, as we have been talking about, now has food resiliency in its jurisdiction, in its title. And we will be very interested in knowing how the food bank, for example, uses Vermont products and how growers and producers in Vermont help address some of the needs that we're working on. So I think we're going to hear a presentation, maybe see a slideshow.
We have a few slides.
Okay, yep. I don't know if you want to, if we have the presentation.
Yeah, she has the ability to share her screen.
Okay, good. And is it on our legislative page?
Yes.
So if anybody would prefer not to turn their head and look at the screen, you can pull it up on your device. And take it away.
Thank you. As I said, I'm John Sales. I'm the CEO at the Vermont Food Bank. I've been CEO at the food bank for 14 years now. Prior to that, my job right before that was Deputy Secretary at the Agency of Natural Resources. And before that, I spent about 6 years in a couple roles, including as Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Public Service. So I've been around state government and I kind of understand how it works. And I understand a lot of your issues, the ag and forestry issues from my time at A&R. Very interesting time there. And so I'm really excited to be the first witness because I can help start fill your heads, and by next week they'll be so full that other stuff can't get in. Some of what I'm saying to you will actually stick. I want to talk a little bit. I've been at the food bank for a long time, and I'm no longer surprised that a lot of people don't really know what we do. Sometimes we fly kind of under the radar. So Carrie and I will talk about what the food bank does, how we interact with state government, with the federal government, with your communities. And I'd love to hear your questions. Really, I want to make sure that the committee understands what we do and how we interact with the new part of the Ag, Food Resilience and Forestry Committee, so we can kind of explore together what that food resiliency means. The first place I wanted to start was, of course, as you'll get very familiar with, what is the food bank looking for from the state and the legislature this year? So everything is different now, right? After March 2020. And certainly the work that we do is completely different. The food bank this year is asking for a $3 million in base funding. Now, we have met while the budget was being built with the administration. I don't know if there's something in the governor's budget or not yet, but we'll find that out soon enough. The $3 million would be to address the sustained increased need for food across the state that we've seen since since COVID came, and actually before that, but that's a long story. The money will go towards increased food purchasing. A lot of that would be purchased, or as much as possible, actually purchased from Vermont farmers and growers. We do a lot of that now already. We want to continue to do that. The cost of that food distribution and support for our community partners around the state. So why don't I kind of dig in a little bit to sort of Vermont Food Bank 101, and Carrie and I are going to do this together. So,
John,
yes, please.
sorry, I do see another chair.
Oh,
You want to come?
there is a chair.
Yeah.
Here,
It's
take
right
this
behind
one.
the door. Thank you.
And I'm also not going to do this, so I apologize and chalk it up to inexperience and you being the first group, but you haven't met us. And so I apologize for, I don't want to interrupt that.
No, please. I think
It's a great time.
It's a great time. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, then again, with apologies, why don't we start down there with Representative Templeman and we'll just go around and quickly introduce ourselves.
Representative David Templeman from Orleans 3, that's Brownington, Barton, and Westmore.
Representative Charles Wilson from Caledonia 3, which is Linden, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, and Newark.
Henry Pearl from the Caledonia, Washington district, which is Danville, Cabot, and Peacham.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1, includes Stowe, Vermont.
Rodney Graham, represent Orange 3, which is Williamstown and Chelsea.
And David Durfee from Bennington 3, Shaftesbury, Sunderland, and Glastonbury.
Heather Supernaut, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, which is Royalton and Tunbridge.
Mike Rice, the Bennington Rutland District. Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
Josie Levitt, Grandal, Chittenden, all of Grandal County, and a little bit of West Milton.
Great, thank you. And I live in Montpelier, actually right up over the hill there.
And I live in Linden.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and this is great actually having you here because
Yeah,
I
blow up
don't have
Lily's
to
here.
turn around to see the screen. So the Vermont Food Bank has been around since about 1983. We were separately incorporated as a nonprofit in 1986. And our mission is to gather and share quality food and nurture partnerships so that no one in Vermont will go hungry. We are, in essence, a food distribution organization. Last year, we distributed about, 13 million pounds of food to 320 plus partners all over the state. Those are food shelves and meal sites, after-school programs, senior centers, homeless shelters, really any kind of nonprofit organization that distributes food to people who are in need can get food from the Vermont Food Bank. We do a lot of other things, which I won't spend a lot of time going into. We can talk about that in Q&A. We do some direct distribution programs. You may have heard of Veggie Van Go, which is our biggest direct distribution program. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to talk a little bit about kind of the landscape of hunger in Vermont.
Yeah, the general context. I will start a little bit with some history for those of you who may not be familiar. Vermont has been through the up and down cycle of hunger before. The last time we saw hunger, and food insecurity is the technical data term for hunger. Hunger is the day-to-day experience of not having enough food to eat. So a lot of our data shows food insecurity. Really what that means is people who cannot put enough, who cannot eat 3 meals a day or put enough food on the table for everyone in their family. Prior to the Great Recession in 2008, food insecurity had been declining. That recession rose numbers in Vermont just like it did around the country. As a state, it took us about 10 years to recover back down to the 2007 levels. And we were just getting to that place in 2019 and 2020 when the pandemic hit. This graph actually shows two different sources of data. Prior to the pandemic, we had to rely on the USDA and a sort of 3-year average of what people in Vermont were experiencing. And that data was pulled from national studies. We now are very fortunate to have a team at UVM who is doing Vermont-specific food insecurity studies. And so these larger numbers are actually pulling from studies done with people in Vermont each time. Over the course of those pre-pandemic years, we were serving about 1 in 4 people in the state of Vermont through our whole network of partners across the state. The current number is 2 in 5 people, which is actually, 4 in 10. 40% of people have shared that they experienced food insecurity in the past 12 months, and that is some of the highest data that we've ever had showing that. And I'm happy to share that study with you as a link if you'd like that information. What that means also is that people aren't experiencing hunger and food insecurity at the same rates based on different demographic data. So women have shown that they're more likely to experience food insecurity than men, not by a lot, but somewhat. Households who experience job disruptions during the height of the pandemic are still seeing the impact of those job disruptions, right? It takes a long time for people to rebuild their stability, their savings. Prices and costs have gone up, and sometimes the job they were able to get after the pandemic maybe wasn't as good as the job that they had before that, or they've changed careers. So there's a lot of changes for those households. And then, like many other things, the lower income folks are seeing this much more strongly, and just much larger impact on those folks than people who are higher income. So households below $50,000 a year are 6.9 times more likely to be impacted by hunger. I'll let you talk about some food distribution programs and the work we're doing to help.
Please.
Okay to ask.
Yes, please ask questions.
Please interrupt us and ask questions.
Committee, if you have questions, don't need to go through me when we've got the witnesses here, but I will just ask, and maybe you did say the 40% number, 2 in 5, is it self-identified?
It is self-identified, and there's a standardized set of questions that are asked to help identify food insecurity. And those, it's like, how often have you not been able to, had skip a meal, or put food, enough food on the table, or access the food that you want?
And how is that data collected? Were there surveys of the population that some of us might have actually been asked to fill out?
Yes, broad surveys.
Building on that, I'm curious with universal school meals, how that's changing the hunger outlook a little bit in Vermont. Or is it too soon to tell?
I don't know. And I do know that study wasn't asking specifically of families with children who were receiving school meals. So I can't say from the data that we have. And that's really a great question for Hunger Free.
Okay.
Yeah, also in the room, for the record, is Honor Horton, who's the executive director of Hunger Free Vermont, who we work with very closely, and we can talk a little bit about the different kinds of work that we do very much in concert. But I would also say, I think you're right, we just don't know yet. The pandemic was so disruptive that it's hard to tease out one piece like universal school meals.
I'm curious if the kids are not facing hunger, but the parents still are.
Yeah.
Right. It's possible. And I would say that there is information that we know about summer meals and summer meal hunger that shows us, the kids are really being taken care of by those in-school programs, and that changes in the summer.
Right.
One thing just to final answer to your question, one thing we do know is when I think it was for about 9 months, the federal child tax credit that was coming to families monthly, we saw a huge decrease in child poverty and in lack of food in the households. When people were surveyed about how they use that money, overwhelmingly people use it to buy food as well as other things.
Is there a sense that the huge increase in data, obviously pandemic, but is there a sense that the data that you're getting from the UVM team is more accurate than the USDA, and so perhaps those numbers were never as low as the data was showing before?
It's entirely possible, but I'm not a data scientist. That's probably a great question for the folks at UVM.
Yeah, and we've seen increases pretty dramatic increases using the local data across the country also. So not just in Vermont.
Question. The data that you're showing here, I've observed in some of the most rural parts or segments of our society, some of the poorer parts. I don't know where this data comes from, but a lot of Vermonters that I'm in forestry or the logging sector, so that's a whole world in itself. But a lot of poor Vermonters are not hooked up to the broadband or internet and don't like pride or history to ask for help or participate in these. I've seen this with other programs, land-based programs. What does the food bank data collection entity do to reach out to these more isolated rural?
I just want to make one clarifying point. We are not a data collection organization.
But you're projecting data.
This is data that the University of Vermont collected about food insecurity. Their nutrition sciences school does do this data collection. And it's a question that we get a lot. We know about people who are using our programs and our systems, how many households are attending events, how many people are coming to our network partners.
Right.
Yeah, but we don't necessarily intentionally, we don't do a lot of question asking of those people who are coming for food. And that is to do exactly what you're talking about. We don't want to dissuade anyone from coming to one of our events or to using one of our network partners because they have to answer a lot of questions. And so we really try to collect the most minimal amount of information possible. How many people are in your household? Do you live in the state of Vermont? For some of the food that we distribute. But this other data that's available to us is coming from a whole separate system through the university. And we're really grateful to have this at our access to this, because otherwise that's really hard information to get. It's a really difficult conversation. And I think you've named something really important, which is that, people in Vermont have a lot of pride and they don't want to ask for a lot of help. And one of the things we often hear is, I don't want to take that food in case someone else needs it more than I do. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's a very human notion here to make sure that everyone is taken care of. And I think that's one of the, beauties of the system that we operate, but it's also one of the challenges that we're often up against is for people who really do need this help to receive it.
Representative Cole has her hand up.
Yeah, you mentioned sending along this particular study, and I think that would be wonderful if by email you could do that. I was looking last night actually for this, and I could not find it for whatever reason.
It's a little.
Yeah, and and for future studies, you mentioned that the nutrition sciences school would be the one responsible. So maybe we should keep an eye on that website.
They do, and it's now an annual study. They have another study for 2023 that they'll be doing. Okay. I don't know the timing of it, but we try to keep our finger on the pulse of that as well. And I'm more than happy to share that information with the committee when it's available.
Sure. So it's more like, sorry to interrupt, just the general overview of food security is basically what they're responsible for versus like micro level, different kinds of study related to food.
They do a variety of
stuff.
And there is some, they do some kind of slicing and dicing of the data.
Yeah.
If you do NFACT, NFACT Vermont, if you Google that, I think you'll get the right links. But we'll send you the links to
I'll send you the link, and it'll have a whole list of studies that they've done during COVID. And some of them are really about food security. Some of them are about more of the food sovereignty issues, like people growing food, hunting and gathering their own food. It's very broad, and I think will be of interest to this committee.
Thank you.
Could you just speak to sort of definition of hunger, food insecurity, sort of in a continuum towards nutrition? Because if it's 2 out of 5 identify themselves having hunger or food insecurity, I would think there's close to the same amount who maybe find enough calories for their family, but say like, we can't afford fruit anymore, so we're gonna eat ramen noodles. So you see a lot of that, and how do you identify that? They might not even say they are food insecure.
Yeah, food. diet quality is very closely related to the ability to afford food. I mean, being hungry is in this country just means you don't have enough money to buy the food that you want. The technical definition of food insecurity is not having enough food to live an active and healthy lifestyle. And actually, when you start talking about diet quality and different programs and how do you get there, that's where sort of we're in the same space with Hunger Free Vermont, and we both really, Hunger Free Vermont's mission is to end the injustice of malnutrition.
And hunger.
And hunger.
Yes.
Thank you.
For everybody in Vermont.
For everybody in Vermont. So we think about that a lot. In fact, it's a trend in food banking across the country that we try to source and distribute what's the most expensive food, which is protein, dairy, fresh produce, fruits and vegetables, and we try to we have a whole program. It's called VT Fresh, but it's all about making the healthy choice the easy choice. So there's a lot of behavioral economics theory around how do you present things in a way, to encourage people to make certain choices, just what advertising does. So we use those techniques to try and steer people toward the healthier choices. We have a nutrition education program with cooking demonstrations. Again, Hunger Free Vermont does a lot of that work also.
Thank you.
So our food distribution programs, and you can see here, this is the chart shows our Veggie Van Go program in 2022, or was it 21?
It's 21 through 22.
21 through 22. And you can see when the big increase, the big dip you see there is actually a point in time where there was it's in the winter, there was some really bad weather. We had some events canceled and it messed up our data. But the trend is definitely, we saw a huge increase in the number of people coming to our Veggie Van Go distributions. Now, a Veggie Van Go is, post-COVID, it's a drive-through event. So basically, it's all fresh food, produce and dairy and sometimes protein. People come to a certain location within a 2-hour window and just drive through, and volunteers are packing bags, and they tell us how many people in the family or how many families they're picking up for, and we put the food in the trunk or in the back seat and people drive through. So it's very low barrier. And we've just seen an explosion, 127% increase in the number of people coming through Veggie Van Go's. And that has not gone down as in the last, year. And we're planning and expecting that we'll continue to see this level of need. It's going to, as Carrie said, it takes a long time for families to recover from the kind of economic shocks that we've seen over the last couple of years. And our network partners, and I know that Representative Levitt is on the board of one of our network partners, Grand Isle Food Shelf, have been 60% of them in the last survey we did, which was just a few months ago, have said that they've seen increases in the number of people coming. I think it was Capstone Community Action, right, in Barrie, their food shelf is seeing about a 40% increase in the number of people coming through.
That's what we've seen too in Grand Isle. And we're one of the only food shelves in Grand Isle County, and there's one that's once a month. And every day I volunteer, every week I volunteer, I'm just like, oh, new people, we're signing up new people, or people are taking more food, or it is, when I started, we were helping maybe 20 people in a 4-hour period, and now we're helping up to 40 people, which represents almost feeding 200 family members. So there's just been a massive increase.
And so, yeah, those are partners. This is a network. The food bank does not do this work alone. And we partner with other nonprofits and with the federal government and with the state, but it's really our community partners that make this work happen. And you can see we're all over the state, all 14 counties. The food bank has 3 distribution centers. We have one in Barrie, one in Rutland, and one in Brattleboro. We have about close to 90 FTEs, 90 employees across the state, including in most of your districts probably. We have a bunch of employees in Chittenden County. We have folks in Bennington. We got people in Addison. So we're all over the state. And those partners, the food shelves and meal sites, the senior centers, and also the schools and hospitals are our partners in Veggie Van Go. So each of those Veggie Van Go distributions is really driven by a community partner. And I think 10, maybe 11 hospitals are partners and sponsor Veggie Van Go's, and many schools also. Sometimes they combine with other schools, but it really is a statewide effort and really is a grassroots effort. I think the last time we asked people, about 70% of the folks who work in those network partners are volunteers. So it's largely a volunteer-driven network across the state. Yeah, prior to COVID, we were distributing between 11 and 12 million pounds of food a year. Since 2020, since March 2020, we distributed until now 50 million pounds of food. So it's been a tremendous increase, almost a doubling of what we were doing pre-COVID. We work with many Vermont farms, large and small. We purchase from farms, we glean at farms, which is volunteers going onto the farm and harvesting what the farmer might not harvest, wrong shape, wrong color, wrong size, regrew, and they're going to plow it under or didn't have a market for it. There are also other gleaning groups around the state that do the same work. So we're part of a network of gleaning organizations. That's one of the areas that really grew during COVID. Not only do we get more philanthropic dollars, but we were able, working with the legislature and the administration in the state, to get CARES Act funding and ARPA funding that has come through the food bank. A lot of that has gone to purchasing local food. When we also purchase food from a lot of produce from an organization called Western Harvest, which is based in Quebec. The food we purchase from Vermont farmers and growers costs about twice what it would cost us to purchase that food elsewhere. But we think it's really important to be part of supporting our local agricultural community. It's our farmers who are feeding our people. We want the folks who are coming to a Veggie Van Go to actually maybe know that a local farm is providing some of that food that they're getting, to create that connection between growing and producing food in Vermont and eating in Vermont. We think that that's really important. In fact, the $2.4 million of money that stayed in the local economy, that doesn't have an economic multiplier on it. That's $2.4 million that the Vermont Food Bank spent with local farmers and growers. And that is, when we talk about a $3 million base funding request, that's where a lot of that money will go. That's going to fuel our ability to continue and to increase our purchasing from local farms.
Can you just talk a little bit about that purchasing process? And
sure.
As far as if it's done primarily on price or if it's logistical, or how you determine where obviously it's opportunity in cases with gleaning and stuff, but like say beef or something, if you're going to buy local, how is that process determined?
Right. So for our larger purchases with larger farms, we actually do a forward purchase contract. So it's actually, we started probably in November, December, start reaching out to farmers, decide what we're going to contract for the next year. And
those are the large purchases that we're making that are pallets of food.
Right.
They're going through our warehouse distribution system.
And for protein, that's more of something that's in stock, but we will forward contract for protein also. A lot of the smaller farms, we actually make, and I know Grand Isle Food Shelf got one. The program is called Vermonters Feeding Vermonters that we used to purchase locally. And we do what we call mini grants. So we made a grant of $2,500 to the Grand Isle Food Shelf, who then contracts with a local small farmer and maybe gets 2 or 3 farm shares that come every week. That way, we're making sure that we're touching the farms that can't produce, pallet quantities and have them delivered to the food bank.
Yeah, a good example for your area is NECA, the Northeast Kingdom Community Action, got one of those grants and used it to purchase beef from a Barton farm that they distribute. And often, they're purchasing half or a whole cow at a time because of their freezer space capacity. And they have, when they have that funding, they're able to use it as they see fit with their own logistical operation, with their own food shelf traffic, with what people are asking for, to make sure that they're making purchases that people really want to receive.
We like that too, because it's much more efficient. So when the food bank's purchasing, we need that to be delivered, pallet quantities on a truck to our loading dock, comes into our facility, goes into our freezer, or into our cooler. The local food shelves and meal sites are ordering. We're picking those orders. It might be 20 pounds of corn that they're getting. And then so we have to pick that order, and then it has to get delivered. It's much more efficient for us to make a grant to the local food shelf, who then contracts with the farmer, goes straight from the farm to the place where the people are picking it up.
Well, why do you think Vermont raised food costs twice as much? Is it just economies of scale?
It really is. It really is.
It's amazing. Like a carrot grown in Vermont costs twice as much.
Western Harvest is a huge growing operation. They sell all up and down the East Coast. A couple years ago, one of our food purchaser went on a tour, and the owner of Western Harvest took them up in his helicopter and went around and saw their operation. So, and we often buy seconds from them, which again decreases the price. What I didn't say is when we contract with Vermont growers and farmers, we're paying a market price, because we don't want the farm and farmers. I know farmers don't make a lot of money, most of them, so we don't want the farmers to be struggling because we're negotiating an under market price. So we put out an RFP, we get responses.
Okay.
Just a geographic question. You refer to this Canadian distributor called Western Harvest.
Yeah.
Is that coming from Alberta or?
Yeah.
Or is it from Western United States? Or is it all?
I don't know why they're called that. They're headquartered in Quebec, and they do a lot of their growing in Quebec. So maybe it's Western Quebec. I don't know. How those Quebecois are. Yeah, it's all about that.
Good question. No answer for that one.
I just think in those terms of topography.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do you reach out to local food shelves that this grant opportunities available?
Absolutely. We're constantly communicating with our partners. And we have a number of different grant opportunities. It's not just to purchase food. It's for equipment, refrigerators and freezers and trucks.
We got a fridge from you guys.
Yeah.
Which we desperately needed because ours broke. And I just want to chime in for a quick second. There's something really lovely about getting a grant from the food bank and knowing, like, our clients care where their food comes from. And if I have someone who's coming every single week to pick up food and they know that it's their local farmer whose CSA share they can't afford, they're like, hey, it's from Patrick, that's great. Or it's from Christine and Adam. It matters. And and we were able to get a new fridge. I think we got a new fridge and a freezer actually, because ours died. And it just allows us to support our incredibly local communities in a way that we probably couldn't do otherwise. So that makes people feel like everybody's helping, and they're also helping the farmer, because we explain how that works and that we are paying full price for a farm share, and that makes everyone feel good. And it's just nice to support local.
That's a really great point. And that's actually something that we've heard from people at Veggie Van Goes who receive this food. They don't feel like they're only taking,
Right.
and they're only receiving help. They actually understand that it's part of a bigger system where they're able to help the farms in their community thrive.
And speaking of a bigger system, I thought maybe I'd take a minute and just kind of connect how the food bank fits into a bigger system. In one level, we are one of 200 food banks in the Feeding America network, which spans the country. We're the only food bank in Vermont doing what we do. And something like New York has 8 food banks. Massachusetts has 4. New Hampshire and Maine each have 1. But we're networked together very tightly and we work very closely together. So for instance, if there's a food bank in Michigan that, got donated 10 truckloads of cherries, because they grow cherries in Michigan, those go on a system and we can all look at them and say, hey, Vermont Food Bank, we could use, half a truckload of cherries. Wow, we'll split that with Maine. So there's a lot of exchange that happens across the country. Feeding America also has relationships with all the large national, international food manufacturers and distributors and growers. And so we're taking advantage of donations that are coming in from all across the country. They do things like manage our transportation and give transportation subsidies, because getting a half a truckload of oranges from Florida is great, but it's really expensive to truck those oranges from Florida to Vermont if you can find the trucking. So we have national people who are helping us do that.
Do you figure that in at all when you talk about how the food you buy in Vermont costs twice as much as other food? Do you account for transportation and also for the climate impact of transporting food across continents?
We don't necessarily calculate the climate impacts now, but we do take into account the transportation costs of food as far as food costs. That's another thing about, we could also be purchasing food from or produce from Texas or Florida or California, but we choose Quebec because the transportation costs are much, much lower. They're just bringing it right over the border.
So those costs are built in, when you say twice as much,
right?
That
includes the transportation costs. Of course, transportation costs for local food is much less, right? Because we're not moving it as far. I'd like to talk just for a second about federal programs, because you're the Ag Committee and it's all about USDA, right? It's also all about USDA for us. Along with Hunger Free Vermont, we work to make sure that Vermont is maximizing the value of all the federal programs that are available. The food bank, as a subrecipient of 2 federal programs that come through the state of Vermont. One, and these are on
the purple side.
On the purple side. One is the commodities.
You'll get it soon.
It's coming
slowly
around.
making its way around.
The Commodity Supplemental Food Program, CSFP, is basically a box of staples that are federal food, comes to the food bank through the state. Volunteers build the boxes and they go out to about 2,500 people over 60 who are income eligible every month. So it's probably about $75 worth of food for folks who are part of this program. And that gets delivered by the food bank close to where the people are. They can pick it up. We have tailgate drops where folks can drive through and get those boxes too. And there is no charge at all for that ever. And then the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, is another USDA program where the USDA actually purchases food on the market, just like a Kroger would, or a Safeway or a Hannaford, and has that food processed. Actually, if you go to a food shelf, you'll see these off-brand labels, like what is Indian River corn? That's USDA product. It used to be back in the 80s, it was, you know, it would be a white label and in black letters it would say corn. Well, they got smart and they started actually putting labels on so people would be more amenable to the food.
Government cheese.
Government
Yeah.
cheese, that's how it all
Government
started, but we won't go down that path. So TFAP is an annual appropriation. It's in the Farm Bill, and then there's an annual appropriation. I think last year was $250 million across the country, and that food is distributed across the country. TFAP is also this year, because of a lot of things I won't go into, but the amount of TFAP food available decreased by about 40%. And when a food source to the food bank decreases, the need doesn't decrease, and we make that up by purchasing more food.
But can you say that again, the amount of decrease by 40%?
TFAP foods.
So it's the USDA commodity food that we receive.
Yeah.
That I think about 90 of our network members
Yeah.
distribute that food. It isn't available to everyone. And that actually is one of the foods that people do have to fill out an affidavit to receive. They have to
Self-certify.
self-certify that they make under the amount that is required to receive that food. And so not all of our network has the capacity or the desire to have food like that. They would rather have food that anyone could have. But it does provide a steady sort of source of some foods that varies on a month-to-month basis. And in the past year, the quantity and variety of that food has decreased by about 40%.
A decrease nationwide or a decrease?
Nationwide.
Nationwide.
It's not because fewer people were requesting or
No, it's-
indicating a need for the assistance.
It's because the funding decreased.
At the federal.
The federal funding for that program decreased, yes. And it is in the Farm Bill, but it is not, the funding is not appropriated at the level that the Farm Bill indicates it should be usually on an annual
Right,
basis. So there's-
authorized.
Yeah, there's often a conversation about funding TFAP adequately, and it is not always. Sometimes it's funded adequately, not always.
And then, so those are the two federal programs that the food bank runs. Also, Carrie, you want to talk about SNAP a little bit, Three Squares Vermont?
Yeah, so SNAP is the federal name for the program that we call Three Squares Vermont here in Vermont. And some people also may know that as it was previously called the Food Stamp Program quite a while ago. And the Vermont Food Bank has a whole team of folks who help do outreach to get people signed up for that program. Right now, the eligibility threshold in Vermont is for folks who make 185% of the federal poverty level. And the federal poverty level right now for a household of 4 is about $27,000 a year. So it's actually even 185% of that threshold is not particularly high.
Can you say that number again? 27?
185% is the threshold to qualify for SNAP, and the current federal poverty level for a household of 4 is about 27,000. I think it's like $27,315 or something. Don't quote me on the exact number, but it's not a lot. Essentially, is
50 grand.
50 grand, yeah.
So for a household of 4, you can make nearly $50,000, which isn't a lot for a family with a couple of kids. And I just want to share a really quick anecdote that sort of helps. It might help bring these federal programs into like a human perspective. I sat down yesterday with a community member who lives here in Barrie, and he's a gentleman in his 60s who recently became disabled because of some medical issues. He was a truck driver for 45 years. Worked his whole life, put all his kids through school, really regular guy. And after this, medical incident that created his disability, he lives on Social Security, disability income, and what little retirement he had, but was finding that really wasn't enough to put enough food on the table. And he said, I make sure my animals are fed, but I was skipping a lot of meals. And he was at the time in physical therapy to recover from these injuries and this illness. And his physical therapist actually put him in touch with the Veggie Van Gogh team at Gifford Medical Center and said, you should come and get produce from this program. And through that was connected with community health workers who also helped put him in connection with Capstone Community Action, who operates a food shelf that he was able to go to. They are one of our TFAP partners, so regularly have those staple foods. And they also helped him sign up for Three Squares Vermont. And right now, because of the pandemic, everyone is receiving the maximum allotment, the maximum benefit for your household level for Three Squares Vermont. At the end of March, that will go back down to what it was pre-pandemic because of the federal omnibus spending bill that just passed in December. And so there were cuts made to the Three Squares federal allotment program, the pandemic relief program that were to offset other programs that Congress chose to put into that spending bill. And when he sat down with me yesterday, he brought the Times Argus with him. And there was an article in it that said, SNAP cuts to happen at the end of March. And he sat down and he said, I know we're here to talk about other stuff, but I'm really mad about this. I'm really upset that the government thinks that, people like us are the place where they can save money. And I can't afford for my benefits to go down. I'm already using Veggie Van Gogh. I'm already going to the food shelf. What else am I supposed to do? And, I didn't have any answers for him. And I said, it is really upsetting. And that is one of the challenges, is a program like SNAP is really critical because he gets to go to the grocery store and shop like anybody else. That's what those benefits do for him. They normalize his ability to pay for food. So that sort of is a conundrum that we're facing, that we're going to see roll out over the spring while you're all here making decisions about how to help Vermonters. And I think it's important to know that that's coming, and we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But I think, Anoran, you can probably tell me, that 70,000 people receive SNAP in Vermont, about 70,000?
That's correct. And every single one of those people, every single SNAP household will see a cut. The average monthly cut will be $82. And for some people, it will be hundreds of dollars a month that they will.
Yeah, and just one of the areas that we work very closely with Hunger Free Vermont, the food bank does SNAP or Three Squares Vermont assistance to sign people up. We'll actually go and sit at someone's kitchen table or sit with them on the phone, go through the application, et cetera. Hunger Free Vermont are the experts in the policies. How does the program run? What are the federal changes that are happening? All that real policy deep dig stuff. It really is Hunger Free Vermont are the experts on that.
And will this also have implications on the WIC benefits?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm going to look into Honora.
Honora, will the omnibus spending have any implications on WIC benefits? I don't remember.
Is that all right if I answer that question?
Or should I say we don't know?
I know you were introduced, but I'm not sure if you introduced yourself for the record.
I didn't. So for the record, I am Honora Horton and I'm the executive director of Hunger Free Vermont. So WIC is happily a separate program in a separate bill. So WIC did not receive the same kind of allotment increases, and WIC is not affected by these cuts in the omnibus bill. So actually, benefits for WIC recipients are staying elevated. So during the pandemic, the way that WIC benefits increased was mostly an increase in a special section of WIC that allowed people to purchase more fresh produce, fresh fruits and vegetables specifically. And that benefit is actually staying elevated. So that is a little bit of good news for the segment of the population that qualifies for WIC. But of course, that's a much smaller segment of the population than the 70,000 people who depend on Three Squares Vermont. And WIC households are also Three Squares Vermont households a lot of the time. So they are going to lose those benefits.
Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
I just wondered, is there a state match to SNAP? I mean, does Vermont have to put in 20% of the budget?
No, SNAP is 100% federally funded. There is a some of the administrative costs of running the program, the state bears? I'm again looking at Honor.
I'm so glad you're here, Nor.
It's a small amount of state funding goes toward administrative costs, but the bulk of administrative costs for SNAP is also federal money. And all of the benefits are federal money.
And it's an entitlement program, so we don't run out, right? If more people sign up, they get the benefit.
Yeah, I apologize, Nora, but it's been a while since I've raised my kids. But what does WIC stand for? I used to know what that meant, but.
It's the Women, Infants, and Children. It's a program that is operated out of the Department of Health here in Vermont. So it is actually a healthcare program for people who are pregnant and people who are raising kids ages birth to 5. They get special medical care, and they need to take kind of nutrition education. They need to do nutrition education activities to remain on the program. So the food benefit in WIC is one piece of a larger program. And even though it's called Women, Infants, and Children, fathers raising young children alone are also eligible for WIC. So the name of the program is a little outdated with who actually can use the program.
I misspelled WIC. That's what got me. I had a K and couldn't quite get a handle.
So at the Vermont Food Bank, I kind of went over this, but I just want to clear. So our sources of food are those federal foods that I talked about, which is maybe a third, a little less than a third of the food that we distribute. Donated foods, which were generally about half, and then the remainder is purchased food. Now, donated foods over the last couple of years have decreased about 20%. There's a number of reasons for that. Supply chain issues being a big one, but also the economy. You know, as producers are squeezed, they kind of tighten up their supply chains and their inventory management, and there's less waste that comes to food banks. So food banks across the country, we're seeing ourselves purchasing more and more food. And also as we focus on nutritional quality, we want to make sure that we're getting the right foods to people. We're a little more picky about what we'll receive. You know, if a pound is not a pound, right? A pound of product that we get from the local Pepsi distributor is not equal to a pound of product that we get from a local farmer, right? So the amount of purchased food has been increasing, and you know, we're always being very creative and looking for new sources, both locally, regionally, and nationally. We work very closely with the food banks around us in New York, in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine, and really all down through New England. Rhode Island Food Bank's a great partner. Anyway.
Yeah. I think we wanted to talk a little bit about, and just so you know, the handout that you received also has a section on the bottom about how food is distributed. The colored arrows kind of help you see where different types of food go, and you can take a look at that and let us know if you have questions, but it's a lot of the programs and partners that we already discussed. I just wanted to make sure to point that out.
So just to be clear with these arrows. Oh, no, sorry. There it is.
Yeah, the colors, right? You just kind of follow the colors and it'll help with the flow chart process, but it sort of helps you understand that some of our distributions are receiving multiple types of food. Others are just sort of reliant on, you know, purchased food like our backpack program.
So go ahead.
Maybe while we still got this in front of us, in the purchased food section. So earlier you mentioned it was 2+ million of locally or within state purchased product. How does that compare? What would the total budget for purchased food be in a year?
So our total budget for purchased food last year was about want to say about $4.8 million.
So.
2.4, yeah, 2.4 was Vermonters Feeding Vermonters funding to farm.
Now, because we received some of the ARPA funding, it will be different this year. We also have what's a co-op program. So we purchase food and then our food shelf partners can purchase it through the food bank. During COVID, and I think it may be ending soon, but during COVID, everything we purchased was distributed at no cost. So we were purchasing shelf-stable foods also, and just everything was no cost. So now we're transitioning, or we have transitioned back to most of the foods that we're purchasing at the food bank are then available for cost. Now, produce, we never charge for. So the produce that we're purchasing, both from Western Harvest and from Vermont growers, is all distributed at no charge. But when we buy, a pallet or a truckload of green beans, those then are available for purchase by.
Do you mean shelf-stable green beans?
Shelf-stable green beans, yes, thank you.
Spaghetti.
SpaghettiOs.
Box
right.
of spaghetti.
Right, box of spaghetti. So going forward, the $3 million, base appropriation that we're asking for would allow us to maintain that higher level of no charge products for our food shelf partners, as well as continuing to the level of granting that we've been able to make. And we also, during COVID, reduced pretty dramatically the fees, delivery fees, membership fees that we used to have to help. It was sort of that skin in the game perspective. But we realized that the food bank has a greater capacity to raise funds and to kind of see the bigger picture around the state and make sure that resources are distributed as equitably as possible.
Right.
I know. We had a discussion earlier about Grand Isle.
And I was like, I like you, but I want to bitch about Grand Offers.
The need there.
But can I just interject for one quick second? These small changes that they're making in terms of not paying for things, lowering the threshold for membership and for delivery, that has an effect on the food shelf that I've been part of for a year, every single week. And it takes some of the sort of agony out of how much can we spend on food. Because, we are a very small not-for-profit in Grand Isle County, and we just became a not-for-profit this summer. And so every point where we can save means we can bring in more and better nutritious food for our people, our clients. And this is the same at every single food shelf in the state, whether it's a monthly thing or a weekly thing, or in Sheldon, it's a 5-day-a-week thing, or in St. Albans. So these small changes have a profound effect in the kind of food you can bring to your clients who are hungry. And the other nice thing about it is, one of the things that we try and do is we like to feed people with dignity. So we let them shop. I mean, we still have it's not Hannaford's, but we have craft products. We have, chicken or whatever, good tuna that people recognize. We have brands that people recognize. So it isn't just what looks like sometimes sketchy USDA stuff. That's still good, but it doesn't look like, yay. You know what I mean? So every little incremental change that they're able to provide throughout Vermont has a multiplying effect.
Have you explored possibly partnering with, I'm just thinking of, are there farms that could be, or processing plants that could be just for food shelf, whether it's Vermont or say New England? So say there was a dairy plant that shut down, a mid-sized dairy plant, or we have 3 dairy farms. Could you partner with New England essentially to have a food bank cabin?
Yeah, we've been looking at that for years and years. We did some projects a couple of years ago with the Center for an Agricultural Economy in Hardwick, and tried to figure out how can we create some prepared foods, using Vermont products, Again, it's the economics. It's just really, really challenging, particularly the labor cost. And you need skilled labor to run those lines, and so you can't just use volunteers. So it's something we're still working on, and I'll share the food bank in Maine, Good Shepherd Food Bank, had just a year ago purchased a processing facility. And so we're partnering with them, and they're creating a product. It's going to be broccoli florets to begin with, because they grow a tremendous amount of broccoli in Maine, which I didn't know. And so they're cutting and washing the broccoli in their plant, and then they're partnering with Wyman, the blueberry company, because it's off season. And so Wyman's doing the freezing, and they're going to be selling the product through Hannaford, and to other food banks and nonprofits. So we'll get lower cost, and all the profits from the product that gets sold at Hannaford will go to whatever local food bank. So all of their products that get sold at Hannaford in Vermont, the profit from that will come as a donation to the Vermont Food Bank. And we're looking at those kinds of partnerships around the country, but Maine has been able to do this at a scale that Vermont hasn't so far.
Rep. Wilson,
Yeah, I live outside of Lindenville, but a constituent confronted me about SNAP was going to close. And he told me I have to do something about it. And where do you start with that?
About the changes to SNAP benefits?
Yeah, about doing something about.
Yeah.
It's a federal program. So I think the challenge for us as a small state in a large federal program is to really, to talk to our federal delegation. This is a farm bill year, and along with Hunger Free Vermont and some of the CAP agencies and Vermont Center for Independent Living and a bunch of other partners, we are doing advocacy work for the farm bill to try and make sure that SNAP is a strong program in that bill, and to hopefully gain whatever ground we can in this congressional session. Although last week's, congressional process makes you wonder how much ground is going to be gained where. So trying not to get our hopes up too high, but that work is in progress. I'm happy to keep you updated as we know more about what's going on at the federal level. But I think, it sort of, you're putting your thumb on one of the challenges of the food system when it comes to this sort of charitable food process, is that a lot of the work we're doing, major decisions are made at the federal level that really strongly impact the lives of people here in Vermont. And there are things that we can do locally to offer resources, but, the federal government really has a lot of resources, and Vermont has some of those resources through the programs that exist. But
yeah, and along with Hunger Free Vermont, where we have very, very close relationships with our federal delegation. The food bank is part of Feeding America, which also does advocacy work on this, and Hunger Free Vermont is part of FRAC, the Food Resource Action Council, that also does national advocacy work. So it's a constant effort to work on those programs.
Thank you.
And you can always refer people to us.
yeah, feel free.
For details. Yeah, we are resources to you, for your constituents and for you in dealing with these issues.
I think Representative Cole may have had a question.
I think I'll hold off for now. It's too small. It was about the labeling of the broccoli, and just curious if that would be obvious, that this is the product.
Well, yeah. I can't remember the brand name right now. Yeah, it will be. And I'll let you know if it's
when
it's
we
coming up. I know they're not on the shelf.
That's cool.
Just curious how the 2.4 million breaks down. The spending in state, is it typically mostly on dairy? Is it mostly on produce? Is it mostly?
It's mostly on produce. Because we do the forward contracting and make the mini grants out. We typically, the dairy we're purchasing, it's typically not as much fluid milk, but more butter and cultured products. Yeah, more shelf stable.
Yogurt,
Butter,
yeah.
yogurt. Butter is very high demand and we get very little donated. Yogurt, cottage cheese, things like that, we tend to get more donated because it's coated. And the manufacturers, if they have something, if Cabot, we get a load from them every week, stuff that's short coated in their coolers, they'll send it to us because we'll get it out to people in their hands, in their kitchens within a couple of days. And protein meat is very expensive. So, we're judicious about the amount of that we purchase.
Yeah, though some of our network partners, like I was saying, do choose to use it that way. And I don't know that I have data about how all of those grants are used.
Is there any consideration for sort of method of farming ever when you're making these purchases?
No, and we work with all kinds of farmers. We work with a lot of farmers who are certified organic. The one I'm thinking of is the sweet potato farmers, Laughing Child Farm.
Yeah, Laughing Child.
Yeah.
Just out of my district.
Huge, we purchase a lot from them and they donate a lot to us. But we also work with Sam Mazza, his big farm, and Paul Harlow down in Putney.
I have a question regarding the notion of inflation. Regardless if you're poor or somewhat affluent, I don't know any person I've run into in the last 6 or 8 months who isn't shocked when they walk out of a market with a little bag in there. It doesn't have much good stuff in it, but it's still what it costs them. So why would SNAP think lowering the
This is a great
generosity is intelligent this time in history, in this high inflation?
We had a discussion with Representative Levitt earlier, and she asked me, what is the solution here? And to me, it's, a doubling of SNAP benefits and increasing the eligibility from something like 185% of federal poverty to 300 or 400%. So people who really need it, and if you're at the top level, you're getting a small benefit because it's scaled based on your need. But you're right. What's available is not supportive of what people's needs are right now. And that's why, it's that inflation, particularly housing and food, is why we're seeing the huge increase in the number of people who are looking for assistance out there.
We had people who were applying for SNAP benefits, and 2 retired people living, no kids at home, and just living off their Social Security. They didn't even qualify. The benefit threshold is so low for SNAP that, and they're like, well, now what do I do? And I'm like, well, you keep coming here. And they're like, we want to be able to get, because when you get SNAP, you get what looks like an ATM card. Nobody, unless you have SNAP, you don't know that it's a SNAP card, and you just go to your local store, and all our stores in Grand Isle County accept it. And it's a much more dignified way to get benefits. It's not like the old literal food stamp book that my mom had when she was a kid. And the benefit threshold is so low that it really isn't serving as many people as it could be. And, some people who were qualifying, they got a bump up in Social Security that was, I think, 6.8% or 8.6, I forget which. And it was just enough to bump them out of being able to qualify for SNAP. And one constituent called me and said, I have $19 a month for food now.
Yeah. Yes.
I might add on just to that very specific point too, that though it is sort of discrete in the sense that you can display your card and just pay upfront, one tricky aspect, and I don't know if it's still applicable today, but I do imagine it is that only certain foods qualify. And so it's not quite as as universal as, so I worked at the Department of Health for a little bit and working in this program in particular, and that was a huge challenge. And just being in the aisles, like, does this product qualify for this? Am I going to be able to pay for this? When I check out, is it going to be embarrassing because I have to put this particular piece of food away? yeah, and then, but that, yeah, it's just one specific point to that too, that it's not quite as universal, but.
Yeah, I think that goes to John's point, like making these programs more universal, more responsive to the way people shop, to the food they actually need, is a solution to hunger, right? That's the solution. Our system is doing its best to patch together folks who can't afford this right now. But to really solve this problem, we have to look more broadly and make those changes that are hard to make.
Yeah, just to kind of, to wrap it up, I know we're getting close to lunch. I appreciate being able to talk to the committee, and I appreciate your questions a lot. Really great questions. As I said, Carrie and myself and Honor will be here, I'm sure, at Hunger Free Vermont, are resources to you. As you figure out what being a committee of food resiliency means, you're going to be hearing from other people talking about the food system in Vermont and local agriculture and different angles of this. We all talk to each other outside of this room, so be assured of that. The problems are challenging, and so we don't always have solutions for them. We don't always know the best ways to work together, but we are working together. We are also, we'll continue to work with the Human Services Committee. And as we figure this out together, we just want to make sure that you're aware of the work that we're doing, and connect with the people in your communities, your constituents, who might be accessing these services. Go to the food shelf and talk to the folks there. You can contact us and we can connect you with your local food shelf if you'd like. Most of you probably already are or know that. You can come to one of our Veggie Van Go distributions. We do them in all 14 counties. And we'd love to have you there, and you can kind of you can meet people and see how it works. Seeing is believing. We also just finished renovating our facility here in Barrie at the Wilson Industrial Park. And we'd love to invite people to come up and take a tour. Sometimes it's different once you walk into that 20,000 square foot warehouse and see the pallet racks 4 high full of food and the forklifts driving around. Just the scale and scope of the work that's being done in our little state. And the fact that we're not solving hunger right now, that the need is greater than the food that we can supply. And so how can we think creatively and differently about what we're doing to try and make more progress? Food Bank does a lot of things we haven't talked about. So if you hear about something and have questions, again, just reach out to us. We're happy to sit down with anyone at any time to talk about what we do.
Great. Well, we appreciate your coming in and sharing the information with us. I think it's really helpful for the committee to get, to understand what's federal, what do we have control over, what can we do, directly. We can all call our congressman and, but what can we do at the state level that might make up for some of the gaps that look like are showing up in federal support. So,
I'll just add to that. Prior to COVID, the food bank received $86,000 a year directly from the state, from the general fund. Since COVID, it's been millions of dollars, and you can see it in the handout of COVID and CARES Act funds. We're in a different time now. And a $3 million base appropriation would allow us to respond more effectively to the need that's out there in our communities right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you email me that report from UVM?
Yes, I will send it to Laura so she can share it with the whole committee too, but I'll email it directly to you.